Catherine, did you want to comment on perhaps the value, why it didn't with us, whether the
Yeah.
value to the community?
Sure. I'll probably bring a slightly different perspective to this because I'm
on the dark side.
well, I mean, I'm an engineer. It was always, when I was at university, we didn't talk too much to the art students because there was fear of something that you have to cross the road at Sydney Uni and so on and so forth. So I've always sort of seen the artistic and creative world sort of as an outsider, I suppose. My wife actually is a writer, and so probably in the last few years I've got to see it more from her perspective, which I found really interesting because I find I have a lot to do with sort of startup businesses and things like that, which I think, if you look at the creative world, is a very similar enterprise. And it's taking it to an idea, it's then making that idea into something public that potentially has value for the recipients, whether that's cultural value or additionally financial value as well. But I found that that artists and creatives tend to look at it very, very differently from the way I do. So keep that in mind with my comments. As I'm probably, I hope they're interesting, but I'm certainly happy to be challenged on them where I say something.
And you might hear me snorting all the time.
I'll watch my right flank as I talk. I think the first thing I sort of wanted to focus on in terms of value is a bit more of a sort of a 30,000 foot view of the creative world. And I think if you go back historically, art emerged when society had sufficient money in it to fund artists outside of paying for food and accommodation and things like that. So art and culture have kind of grown out of the, from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, from the fact that we've solved our fundamental physiological problems and we're now more in need of that sort of cultural respite. And I think over the years you find that the reason we now have such a vibrant artistic and cultural community is simply that we have vastly more money in our societies to fund that kind of endeavour. And so I think while initially we may sort of seen artistic creations and whatnot as something that we definitely wants as opposed to needs, I think we've now, certainly in Australia, definitely in Canberra, our sense of artistic self is now, it's a fundamental need for us as a community. And so I think that in seeing that change now, it changes how artists, I think, have to be aware of the value that they're delivering. But back in the day, you had your patron, and as long as your patron was happy, he paid you, and you produced your, you sculpted David, and you got paid by the Doge, and everybody was pretty happy about that. And it was a good model because it gave quite a lot of artistic license to the creator, because they really only had to satisfy themselves and the guy who was paying for dinner. And I think that's changed quite a bit now. We don't have that same sort of model of the patron anymore. We now have many, many patrons. And so, when you're setting something up in Canberra, you have the government who's potentially involved in giving you space, or other organisations who are involved in giving you space. You have the performers who you're bringing to the table, and they need to take some value out of their participation. And then, I suppose we tend to think of the audience as the true patron, and they're the people who are there paying for tickets and who get the most perceived value out of it. But I don't necessarily think that that's the right view of it. I think everybody in this, all of the stakeholders in the new artistic world need to be deriving some value from it. So I thought I'd just sort of reflect on that in terms of the value that is created by this kind of event, and potentially how understanding that can lead us to understanding why there's been a resurgence around it. So I think when the typical issue of funding and whatnot has always been a challenge for artists, because if there's not the space to have these events and then the value for the organisations who are providing the spaces, you have instant problems. If you don't have a space, you don't really have an event. And so I think there does need to be that. For them, it's often for them a marketing exercise in their own right, because they would like people in an embassy who wants it. They're presenting a view of their country to the world, and so by offering a space or creating a space for an event to happen, it's marketing for them. So no longer are you just marketing your event as a music festival, you're now marketing, others are using that as a way of marketing themselves as being progressive and cultural and forward-looking and things like that. So I think there's a lot of emphasis then for the festival itself on having that, that brand image that then others wish to be involved with. And a lot of these innovations we were talking about in recent times help that, because the festival being seen as progressive then means that there are a lot more entities who wish to be involved with it. And I think that also then comes into the willingness for performers to attend and things like that. Performers, creatives and artists, I always have a slightly strange time sort of understanding. On the one hand, I do understand the concept of artistic integrity, but in this sort of brave new world where you're funded by so many different participants in the community, I don't think that, I think sometimes that there can be an almost arrogant view of artistic vision that sort of sits isolated from the fact that at the end of the day, without someone to consume your vision, you don't really have a market to actually continue to produce that vision. And in saying that, I'm not saying that everybody should be a pop star or should be creating something that's popular or populist, but I do think that you have to be mindful of the fact that if you want people to participate in your artistic creation, you actually need to be mindful of the fact that they actually are part of it. And they're at least half of it, because they're the ones who consume it, so they derive the value that they get from what they see and hear and feel, rather than purely being the artist sitting up here going, this is my artistic creation, enjoy it, I'm amazing, look at me. So that one I found very, very hard to understand. My wife, she just submitted a book to some publishers. I said, you could look at self-publishing. You cannot look at self-publishing because real, in her view, you need to publish properly. It needs to go through a proper publisher.
Not anymore.
Oh, no.
I don't know, I just mean in terms of, I totally disagree with that because technology's liberated that, but from
absolutely.
her view as an artist, she wants the stamp of the penguin or the,
Yeah.
Random House or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think performers now, with a festival that creates value by being seen as progressive, performers are also given that incentive now to come to acquire the brand of the music festival. And so where you don't need everybody to be doing something progressive in the festival, and I think there's a real danger to every artist suddenly going, this is my purely artistic creation, I'm going to allow people to walk around or something like that. But where you have people doing that as part of it, it inspires others to get involved because they have the opportunity to participate in that vision. And I think for the attendees, it's about having something which is valuable to them, which doesn't just exist in the moment of the performance, especially for music. And music's seen as, I think sometimes something that's quite ephemeral. You go to a performance and you have that experience, but I think the artistic, my view of art is that it's something that touches you directly for that moment, but then it's something that you carry on as part of you. You learn something, you experience something, you feel something during that performance that you then carry on. And beyond just the value of the 2 hours you sit listening to a concert, it also determines your willingness to then go back time and again to experience the artistic world. So I think for attendees, it's about offering something that's on some part comfortable with what we expect as an audience, but then also pushing us to experience things that we wouldn't otherwise have listened to or experienced in the comfort of our own homes. If you jump on iTunes, you tend to go to the music you're most familiar with. It's something that I think Canberra's particularly good at, is we're good at pushing people out of our comfort zone. And I really like that about Canberra. I've been to things here that I probably wouldn't have been to normally, simply because I've been in an environment where I went for one thing and got simultaneously exposed to lots of others. So that's probably my 5 minutes. So I might stop there. But I love talking about this stuff. So.